Welcome. My name is Olivia Mattis, and happy Father's Day to all the people in our audience who are fathers, who have fathers, who know fathers. All of you, happy Father's Day. Thank you for spending an hour of your day with us. And I'm always so happy when we're able to bring our film series back to our own story, the story of our hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes. My name is Olivia Mattis. I'm president of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. The foundation is now 13 years old. It's our bar mitzvah year. We started in the year 2010. And my own connection is that this was a personal tribute on my part to my father, who got a visa in 1940. And we have a cute little picture of him when he was a little child of 7 in Brussels before he escaped. That picture is coming up. And before he got the visa from Aristides de Sousa Mendes, his name at the time was Daniel Matuzowicz. And now the name is Mattis, and that's the name that I have today. So, hi, Dad. Happy Father's Day if you're watching. And so today I wanted to, first of all, thank our series sponsor. Her name is Eva Wummer. She lives in Florida. She's the sweetest, most wonderful person. You will meet her in the film series and on the panel on July 2nd. She herself is a Sousa Mendes visa recipient, and she's made it possible for us to be able to offer this series to you free of charge. So I hope you will spread the word to all your friends and family to sign up. There are 3 more episodes and 1 more program after today. So thank you, Eva, for making it possible. Thank you also to SIC Television in Portugal. This series was very much of a collaboration between the Sousa Mendes Foundation and SIC Television. We have the director of the film series with us, Lucia Gonçalves. You're going to hear from her in a minute. I met her 10 years ago in 2013. We did a trip that we're doing again this year. It's called Journey on the Road to Freedom. It takes a group from France through Spain and into Portugal, retracing the footsteps of Aristides de Sousa Mendes and the refugees of 1940. Lucia came on our trip in 2013. She documented the trip, and I think the idea stayed in her mind from that time. And it's like it was a little seed that got planted and grew into this giant oak tree of the 5 episodes that you are seeing. So Lucia will be our first speaker, coming to us from Portugal. Our second speaker was himself rescued in 1940 by Sousa Mendes. He's been involved in the Sousa Mendes cause for many, many years, much longer than me. His name is Michael Spett, and he's one of my favorite people, and he was so kind to agree to speak to you about his own story and his family's story. Our third speaker is Mr. Ron Brunel, and he's a new friend. He and I just met, and his father's testimonial is one of the most incredible testimonials that is out there, maybe the most incredible one. Ron's father escaped as a 13-year-old doing this whole exodus as a child himself and just running by his wits. So it's just amazing to have that story as well. So welcome to all 3 of our guests. Lucia, we're going to start with you. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you, Olivia, and the Sousa Mendes Foundation for the initiative and the invitation to attend this event. It's a pleasure to be here. My knowledge of Sousa Mendes was at the level of any Portuguese citizen. Perhaps I knew a few more things, but I had many questions. And so when the opportunity came up in 2013, 10 years ago, as you said, to follow up on the Sousa Mendes Foundation initiative, Journey on the Road to Freedom, I thought it was an excellent opportunity to find out a little more about the Portuguese diplomat who had saved so many lives but was a stranger to most people. It was a shock to me. The stories told by those who lived them listening to the testimonies in the places where it all happened. It was impossible to ignore the sense of urgency in those accounts. The parents were already dead, they couldn't tell their life stories. The children, who also went through the same trauma of war and survival, felt an obligation not to let history be forgotten. So, me and my colleague, cameraman Joaquim Gomes, made a series of daily reports for our main news bulletin. We started in Bayonne and ended in Portugal, Vilar Formoso. But we soon decided that one day we would return to the story of Aristides de Sousa Mendes and tell it in our own way. The idea haunted me for 6 years. In 2019, I felt I had all the necessary conditions to move forward with this project. I was able to put together a small but gifted team: Ana Luisa and Ana Maria, the producers, Miguel Castro, the editor, and two cameramen, Joaquim Gomes and Luís Diniz. We knew we were going to make a documentary. How many episodes was something that only our research would answer. Our first stop, Luxembourg, February 2019, to cover a large exhibition at the Archives Nationales and another at Centre Culturel de Rencontre Abbey de Neumonster, a place that was our setting for the recording of almost all the interviews. This was a unique opportunity to record with some survivors or descendants, as was the case of the exclusive interview with the Grand Duke Henri, who, for the first time, told how Sousa Mendes helped save the Luxembourg royal family, and by issuing visas to the thousands of refugees, he contributed in a decisive way to a different story in the Grand Duchy. The pandemic forced us to interrupt our recordings. We couldn't travel, but that didn't stop us from trying to continue progressing our project. For a man who sacrificed everything for the sake of so many, I think he would appreciate that his moral values and action were known to the younger generations. So for me, it was obvious that we had to involve young people in this film. Given that Sousa Mendes was a music lover, I thought we should bring new talents to discover the legacy of this man and at the same time pay him a fair tribute. We invite ESMAI, Escola Superior de Música e Arte Espetáculo, their students and teachers to create original music for our documentary. The result? Brilliant. I'm sure that Sousa Mendes would have liked the result, and especially the fact that students of various nationalities were involved in this project. As soon as it was possible, as soon as the pandemic allowed, we returned to the field. During all that time, we were unable to work due to COVID. I knew that the clock was against us. By age or illness, the witness to the visas issued by Sousa Mendes were disappearing. We started by interviewing residents in Cabanas de Viriato, people who knew Sousa Mendes, like Olímpio Tavares. He knew his generosity, the joy he brought to Cabanas, and he also saw firsthand the disgrace he fell into when his acts of courage were known and the regime punished him. At the Museum Vilar Formoso, Fronteira da Paz, that surely some of you know, historian Margarida Ramalho gave us a complete insight about the events that led to Bordeaux 1940. And from here on, in our narrative, we would always have two parallel paths: the refugees that Sousa Mendes saved and himself. So, in October 2021, with the help of the Sousa Mendes Foundation, we went looking for the lives that exist today thanks to the courage of the Portuguese Consul. Me and my fellow cameramen, Joaquim Gomes and Luís Diniz, covered thousands of miles. We listened to several generations. We recorded the testimonies of those who were in Bordeaux, like Michael Speth, and those who heard the story told by their father. Now Michael passes on his life's heritage to his son and grandchildren. The conversation of the two generations that opens our documentary was not staged, and I can say that I got goosebumps the moment I heard it. I must say also that the dialogue we managed to create between Ronald Burnell and his father, Jerry, is one of the richest moments of storytelling and one of the most incredible stories we have ever heard, movie worthy. More than 88 years later, there is still a lot to be told about Sousa Mendes, as we discovered in conversation with Mordecai Paldiel. The interview he brought us of Ravi Kruger to a Yiddish daily in 1941 when he arrived in New York is a detailed and unique account of someone who was in a privileged position during the events in Bordeaux. It even gives us a clue as to the location of the famous photo taken with Sousa Mendes and Kruger. And another astonishing revelation was to learn that Mordecai Paldiel's father also had a Sousa Mendes visa, although he never used it, a fact he was unaware of many years before when he was director of Yad Vashem and decided to plant, in secret, Sousa Mendes tree in the Garden of Righteous. There are still untold stories, unrevealed images. I will never forget Silvia Montezino's laughter and his generosity of her family in giving us precious images from their family archive. That home video is a good example of what was happening. They represent the end of innocence, the coming of something terrible. There are still unanswered questions, like Alice Verdi, Sylvia's son, said, how come some stay and some left? It's assumed that those who left were the ones who were informed, who followed the news, who were aware of the danger. As I said, we wanted to involve young people in this work. It was essential to give voice to the younger generations and to know what they think about Sousa Mendes. The diplomat's act of conscience allows us to create a forest of life that has spread all over the world until today. We listened to the youngest descendants in the United States and Canada. They too are grateful and have learned from Sousa Mendes' example. I always thought that this series was not just telling the story of Sousa Mendes, the lives he saved, the exodus of thousands, and how Portugal was a path to freedom for so many. It tells us that each of us can make a difference in the lives of others simply through our choices. He was a pioneer in the defense of refugees, and this vision was something new, and we were able to bring it into this work with a statement of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. A very successful interview in a difficult moment with the war in Ukraine. It was extremely important for us to have obtained this interview, and it would not have been possible without the help of Stéphane Dujarric, whom I thank publicly. One of the pleasant surprises was getting to know David Fry and the mission he has undertaken at the United States Military Academy at West Point as history professor. His reflections remind us that choices matter, and it is important whether you are in diplomatic service or in army, you are often asked to make tough choices. He appeals to the example of Sousa Mendes to teach future leaders to know that some things are non-negotiables. Where is the red line of our conscience? Sousa Mendes said what was his. He paid a high price for it. Something that also surprised us was the fact that Sousa Mendes tried to leave Portugal alone, without a family, in misery. He tried to immigrate to join his children, and even without posing any danger to the regime, they didn't allow it. So we had remarkable experience with all 37 interviews. I confess that I never thought we would gather so many testimonials, but there was a sense of urgency in collecting these memories. And on the other hand, the research ended up taking on a life of its own. Our production went through 7 countries. It even included a fishing trip to Florida, outstanding experience provided by Bill Wammer Eva Paula Kwammer's son. He knows he wouldn't be here today, wouldn't have the pleasure of fishing if Sousa Mendes hadn't helped his grandparents and mother. Finally, I must say, I made new friends, even while my cameramen were to shoot some footage with Anka Begley. I loved meeting Grisha, Anka Begley's dog, very friendly, but didn't want to join us for a walk in the park and stayed with me. I've never been more popular in New York than during that hour I was sitting on the stairs of a building with Grisha on my lap. Next, it's my pleasure to pass the floor to the following guests, Michael Spetz. Michael, it's a pleasure to see you.
Yeah. Hello, Lucia. It was really great to see you again. It was really a surprise when I got that phone call from Portugal, and I was happy to join you and participate in this wonderful project that you developed. And it's really, everybody comments how excellently and professionally it looks, and we're very proud of that. Early in 1986, my firm was asked to design and print this book, The Courage to Care, to accompany the award-winning film that was up for Best Documentary Oscar Award. Unfortunately, they didn't get it. The book consisted of individual families in various countries who were hidden by righteous Gentiles, and had accompanied pictures of photographs of their children and the people who hid them. In back of the book was a section about diplomats and consuls who had saved the equally large numbers of Jews. And this is where, when they're talking about the consul in Bordeaux, the Portuguese consul, I have his name, Aristides de Sousa Mendes. This was the first my family and I ever heard or learned the name of the consul, indeed, who saved our lives by signing the visa that my father got when he was in Bordeaux after a long trip, which I'll tell about in a moment. But this was really a moment in my life that was very sensitive. And here's my family, or my father's family, in 1903. This is where it all began. They were all born in Poland. Because he was born in Poland in the First World War, he had to go into the Austrian army. He was in the 17 years old. Because he was a high school graduate, he was in the First World War as an officer, and was wounded and got out of the hospital and so on. A lot of stories of that. But because of that resourcefulness that he developed in that situation after the war, he was able to handle a lot of the problems that he had running a business, developed a printing plant in Germany where he grew up. And when time came that Hitler came into power, first thing he did was seize the printing plants of the Jews, because he was printing anti-Nazi and anti-Hitler stuff. So in the middle of the night, one day, a friend of his in the police department had called and said, "You better get out of town, because they're coming for you in the morning and seizing your plant by court order." This is all very legal at the time, 1933, early 1933. So he fled to Belgium, to Brussels, Belgium. My mother, who was his secretary at the time, she was arrested and put in jail for 2 days. And then after about 6 months, they were following her. They was hoping they would catch my father. But she got smuggled into Belgium, and they married, and 9 months afterwards, I came along. So when May 10th happened, the bombs are falling on Brussels. With that experience from wartime, my father says, "We're going to get out of here." They took 2 days later, the last train is supposed to go to Paris, but the tracks were bombed, and it was a 3-day trip circumventing all the bombed areas. So then they wound up in Bordeaux that morning on the 15th of May. My father took me aside and said, have an attack. He's talking about the asthma that I had as a child, and frequently he understood when I would fake an attack to get sympathy. And this is later on a story I told in the classrooms when they wanted to have Holocaust victims talking. But anyway, with that, he got to see the station master. And so we were the only family to be able to get off of that train in Bordeaux, which was very fortuitous because my Uncle Max, he was in the picture above. He's about 15 years older than my father at the time, and always. But anyway, he was on that train, and that the French, the Vichy French, had sealed the train and put them all into Vichy detention camps. And from Portugal, my father was able to work to get him out of those camps. Okay, from Bordeaux, we managed to get to the border, and then to Spain, through Spain to Portugal, and there we were able to get boats and everything else. My father was going from state embassy to embassy, heard that Portugal was giving visas. He stayed overnight and then got the visa from Sousa Mendes, and we were able to go out 6 months later into the United States. And we are always grateful to this man who saved 30,000 people, among them 10,000 Jews. And if I always tell my family and the kids, if that hadn't happened, and here's a passport, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be here. So we were ultimately very grateful for Sousa Mendes for saving our lives. And it's really a lesson to be learned what the crisis of conscience can do to do the right thing and go against orders. But if you know you're doing the right thing, as Sousa Mendes did, paying a very steep price for that at the signs, loss of his job, his prestige, his estates, and his good name. And that's why the family, which I've been working with from meeting them over time, were so successful in getting him to be the prestige now that he fully deserves. And I'm happy to be joining into that situation. So I'll let you pass it on to Ron, whose father's story is really amazing and is really almost the highlight of the whole series. So go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm going to start with a real big thank you to Olivia and the foundation for all they do to recognize this hero and a man among the righteous now. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this. And Lucia, I can't thank you enough for the recording that you made. It's almost like a hologram of me talking to my father. It brought tears to my eyes and to my family. And it's something that we can, document forever and ever. So my dad's story starts, he was born in 1926 in Cologne, Germany. And he lived a normal life until Hitler came into being, and he had to go to Jewish school. And there's a picture of my dad at 13, normal 13-year-old boy, got bar mitzvahed, and his family owned a five and dime. And his uncle was a full of brush salesman who had connections kind of around the world. And they were able to get him into a foster family in Brussels. And so he left Germany at 13 to live with a foster family. And, he was given 2 pieces of jewelry by my grandmother. and told, if you ever need these to save your life, that's what you need. And the goal is to eventually try to reunite in the United States. And off this 13-year-old boy went to live with a strange family in a strange land with a strange language that he didn't know. But to know my dad was to love my dad. And he was just a salesman, a born salesman. He could sell anybody anything. And, he fit into Brussels until, Hitler started to get close, and he realized the family that he was with, that time was ticking, and they didn't want to continue to harbor him in fear that something would happen to them. I'm going to just pause the story there and say that my dad did make it to the United States, and he dedicated his life to an institution called the Aufbau. He was the president and publisher of the Aufbau for, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. The Aufbau had a youth group called the New World Club, and my parents' closest friends and my dad's closest friends were all part of the Aufbau, which stands for restoration. And they tried to, as people got displaced around the world, the Aufbau was the newspaper that connected these people. Had a circulation of 50,000 people. It was in German. And I can tell you that my grandmothers waited every week for the Aufbau to arrive so that they could find out who got married, who died, who had a baby. And that's the connection, as people were all over the world. And it was something that was near and dear to my dad. When he passed in 2003, I wanted to do something as Olivia did for her dad. Fortunately, he's still around to see it. I wanted to do something to continue my dad's memory and my dad's legacy. So I joined the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center of Nassau County, where we do tremendous work of, educating people of what happened and teaching them among the righteous. And I'm very proud of that organization, and I'm very proud to be a part of that organization. And so, it's about giving back. It's about, doing, continuing the legacies and the stories for the next generations. So we're going to show a clip now of my dad, who was now in Brussels. His family he was staying with was, making him leave. And he had a Jewish passport, and he realized through the grapevine that he needed to get to Bordeaux, but he didn't have any papers to get to Bordeaux. And so the Spielberg Foundation sent a film crew when my dad was 70 and recorded the story. So rather than me telling it, I'm going to allow my dad the honor of telling his story, and then I'll come back and have some more comments. So Michael, if you'd be so kind just to play the clip.
I just put myself on the ground and I said, I can't move. My leg. So I saw them picking up other people. So that's when I just lied on the ground, and I figured they're going to pick, and they did. They picked me up and they put me into this box car where they put all the others. And once the box car had moved out and it stopped every so often, I just got off, and that was it. But I was out of Dunkirk, and that was what I was trying to accomplish. And there were so many cars on the street. And the Germans came in their planes and shot at us every day and every night. And you saw dead people all over the road, and cars that they pushed off because you couldn't move. But there were hundreds of cars that were moving. So you had no problem getting somebody to take you. When I was in Bordeaux, there were no ships to the United States because there was a war on. And they said the only way that you can get to the United States is if you go to Lisbon. And from Portugal, there's still boats that go to the United States. So now how do you get to Lisbon? And I said, well, I got to have a visa to go to Spain, and I got to have a visa to go to Portugal, and I got to get an exit visa from France. An exit visa is impossible to get because they're going to put me in jail right away. So I said, well, I'll take my chances. And I went to the consulate and got myself a Spanish visa. And that was just an interim visa. I had to get the visa to go to Lisbon, to Portugal. before they would honor the visa to Spain. So I went to the Portuguese consulate to get my visa, and the line was unbelievable. I said, I go back tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and then I'll be able to not stand on this line. Well, I was wrong. I got there 4 o'clock in the morning, and the line was not as long as it was the day before, but it was long, around the block. And I finally got into the outer office of the consulate in early evening, about 5 o'clock. And the people were carrying on like unbelievable. Everybody was screaming and yelling and pushing and shoving. And the consul comes out and he said, if this noise doesn't stop, nobody's going to get their visa. You're going to come back tomorrow. So I got up on a chair and I said, look, I don't care about you, but I care about me. I ain't coming back tomorrow. I stood here all day today, just like you have. And why carry on like this? It's not necessary. Let's keep quiet and have order so we'll all get out of here. But in this chaos, nobody's going to get out of here. So everybody was quiet, and he sticks his head out and he said, what happened here? So the woman said, see that little boy there? He talked to us, and he's right. We got to keep quiet. And he said, you did that? And I said, yeah. So he said, have you eaten anything today? I said, no. He says, come.
So that's my dad, in his own words, how he met Sousa Mendes and was, taken into the office where he was asked if he would like to have a job and to keep order, so that my father got people in order, and then he sent them into the consulate who issued the papers. My dad worked there for about 4 days, and the consulate said, look, you don't have any money, you don't have any papers, so you need to ask them for American money as a gratuity, not for the consulate, but for my dad, because he was looking out for my dad, who at that point was a 14-year-old boy. My dad was used to marks and francs. He knew nothing about American dollars, but in 4 days he worked there, he got $1,000 US, which is what fueled the fund to get him on a ship to the United States. And so he was working there, and the bombs and the Germans were getting closer. And so the story has changed a little bit in that my father believed it was a diplomatic family that came into the kitchen one night, but it was friends of a diplomatic family that had an apartment above the consulate's office. They came down through the back door and into the kitchen, and they wanted their papers. And my father said, who do you have in your car? And they said they had 2 sets of grandparents and the parents and a 3-year-old son. They didn't have any room. My father said, well, if you don't have any room, I don't have any papers. And so it's pretty ironic. I mean, he was 14 at the time, and they said, okay, we'll make room and we'll take you with us. And so with that, they actually got the papers, and my dad went with them in the car, and he left the consulate. And they needed to get over the Spanish border, but my dad didn't have a passport other than the Jewish passport. So he stopped at a liquor store. And remember, he's 14 years old. He got the border guards drunk and said, I'm a Jew and I'm going to walk across the border. And they said, no, you're not. And with that, he gave each one of them a piece of my grandmother's jewelry, and he walked across the border. And he met back up with the Von Italy family, and they traveled to Lisbon. As soon as he got to Lisbon, the first thing that he did is he purchased a ticket on a ship to get to the United States, but he still didn't have the papers to immigrate to the United States, nor backing. So as a 14-year-old kid, he said, Americans are soft. He went to the American consulate in Lisbon, and he started to cry. And they said, what's the matter? And what's going on? And he said, look, I've lost my parents. I've got this ticket to get to the United States, but I don't have any paperwork. I need paperwork. And with that, they gave him the necessary paperwork so that he could make it to the United States. And that's how my dad got out of Europe and got to the United States, where his aunt and uncle met him at the in New York. His parents came about a year later, maybe 9 months later. They arrived on the last transport that went through Japan, and it arrived in Seattle. And then they made the trek from Seattle to New York, and he was reunited with his parents and his sister, who was already in New York. So, pretty amazing story. I don't think I send my 13-year-old son around the corner for a bottle of milk. My grandparents kissed their son and said, let's hope we can reconvene and meet someday in the United States. And it's all as a result of the efforts of Sousa Mendes, who took my father in as one of his own.
That
And
is,
with that, I'll turn it over to you, Olivia, and say thank you again.
that is just the most remarkable story. Each one of these stories is remarkable. And we at the Sousa Mendes Foundation, we're trying to document these stories. If you haven't explored our website, I encourage everybody to do so. You can look under visa recipients and you can search for them by country, by name, by city in Portugal where they lived, by ship that they took. And each of these ways of searching these families takes you to a family page that gives you photos and testimonials and the visa, if we have it, and the whole story of what happened to that family. Because our job here at the Sousa Mendes Foundation is to tell the story of Sousa Mendes's heroism, one family at a time. And so these stories are so beautiful. And Ron and Michael, thank you for sharing your stories with me and with Lucia and with all of us. So right now I'm going to make some announcements. I do encourage you to continue putting your questions into the chat box. We will turn to your questions in just a few minutes. I see there aren't that many questions yet, so please continue writing the questions so that I have something to ask of our guests. Okay, so announcements. So the next 2 weeks, we are staying focused on the Sousa Mendes story. Next week, you will get episode 3 of Lucia's series. And then in 2 weeks, you will get episodes 4 and 5. That will be July 2nd. And on that day, we will have another panel. And so I hope you will tune in for that as well. We have Sousa Mendes's great granddaughter joining us from Portugal, Margarida Mascarenhas. Probably mispronouncing it, but that's who she is. She's delightful. We will have Eva Woomer, who's sponsoring this entire series. And we will have Avi Losik joining us from Israel to tell us his family's story. So that is another panel that I do hope you will tune in for. Then we're taking a break from the Sunday series for a month. And the main reason is that we are doing our trip, Journey on the Road to Freedom. We have a group of about 40 people traveling from Bordeaux to Lisbon, Portugal in the second half of July. And so I will be with them. So I won't be with you on the Sunday. So we're taking a little break for that. We are then reconvening in August. And so August will begin our fall series of Sunday programs. And our very first program is something that absolutely you will not want to miss. It is the film that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this year, 2023. And it's the film on the dissident, the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who is right now in solitary confinement in Russia. It's a young Jewish Canadian filmmaker who did this film at the risk to his own life. And the person who was responsible for this film coming to be was Karl von Habsburg of the Habsburg Empire, whose family was saved by Sousa Mendes. So we have all kinds of reasons to present that program to you. And of course, it's a great story of moral courage and the fight against authoritarianism. It's a fabulous film. And we're going to now show you a little trailer just to tease you and entice you to sign up.
Okay, so Alexei, I want to talk about something that we sort of touched on this morning. And you might hate this, but I really want you to think about it. If you are killed, if this does happen, what message do you leave behind to the Russian people?
Alexei Navalny has taken on the most dangerous job in the world, challenging the leader of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin.
If I want to be a leader of this country, if I want to fight Putin, I have to organize people.
Война в Украине и война в Сирии. Я прекращу войну.
The Kremlin hates Navalny so much, they refuse to say his name.
I was banned from everything and blacklisted. But as I became more and more famous, I was totally sure that it will be problematic for them to kill me.
And boy, were you wrong.
Yes, I was very wrong.
Alexei Navalny arrives at this hospital in Berlin.
To have your dad, an opposition leader, being poisoned, it was literally like a book.
Come on, poisoned? Seriously?
We were so shocked. It's like Putin's leaving a signature on a crime scene.
It's kind of stupid.
We found a domestic assassination machine on an industrial scale.
Navalny will personally call his poisoners one by one.
Это Навальный, Алексей, вас беспокоит. Хотел узнать, зачем вы хотели меня убить.
Oh my God, you ruined their day.
Navalny is stepping into a showdown with the Kremlin.
I want to go back and try to change Russia.
It's something worth fighting for.
Are you not scared, Alexei?
Поэтому бездействовать не надо.
Great. So registration is not yet open for that program in August, but do keep an eye out for it. And now we will turn to your questions. So we have Mary Seaman in Toronto, who is herself a visa recipient, with a question for Ron. Ron, you referred to a Jewish passport. Tell us about your father's passport. How is it a Jewish passport?
It was a German passport with a J on it, which signified that he was a Jew.
Okay, okay. We have a number of people from visa recipient families in the audience, and they're posting in the chat box about their families, and that's terrific. Question for Lucia about Sousa Mendes's Catholic faith, right? He was a devout Catholic. He had 15 children. He said, I would rather stand with God against man than with man against God. And so the question has to do with these efforts over recent years to actually try to get him canonized, to try to make him a saint. People have tried several times over the years to go through that process. So Lucia, what can you tell us about Sousa Mendes' Catholic faith, and do you think he will be made a saint? What are your feelings about that?
I think that Sousa Mendes, it's very difficult for us to see Sousa Mendes as a saint. For example, the only interview that we couldn't make, it was with the Vatican. It was the only interview. And it was very important because we have a numbers of people, all these testimonials, the descendants, the family members. We interview the only doctor still alive, Sousa Mendes' daughter still alive in France, telling us how Sousa Mendes was a devout Catholic, and we know he was. We have all these documents, all these letters that you wrote to the Vatican. For example, we wrote to the press officer of the Vatican, and we told them that among the information that we were able to collect is the one states that Sousa Mendes wrote 2 letters to the Pope Pius XII. Both were addressed to Cardinal Masella, and we confirmed that information with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They have historians that can attest that. They told us that asking for an interview with the Holy Father or for someone from the public relations or whatever, it was not possible. It's very difficult for me to understand why the Catholic Church still today doesn't speak about Sousa Mendes, because you can read all that has been published about Sousa Mendes, and you don't see anyone from the Catholic Church speaking about Sousa Mendes. You have the Day of Conscience, yes, the Pope has given that Memorial Day, but why they don't speak in an interview and publicly about Sousa Mendes more often? It's very, I don't have an answer for that. So yeah, for him to be a saint, I don't think that will happen so soon.
And from my knowledge of the Sousa Mendes family, my friendship and love for the family, the children and grandchildren, it's my understanding that the family would not necessarily encourage the process of canonization because, you know, he was not a saint. He was a human being who made a moral choice that any one of us can make. And I think that's the right way to look at it.
Yeah. Yes, so, I totally agree.
Audience members, put more questions into the chat, please. So we have a question here for Ron about the Shoah Foundation that was founded by Steven Spielberg. So how did that come about, the interview with your dad? Did they reach out to him? Did he reach out to them? Do you remember?
My dad was very involved with the Aufbau, and through the Aufbau, he was recognized by the German government. He won the Commander's Gold Cross, which is the equivalent of like a Nobel Peace Prize. And so he was back and forth to Germany, promoting that, you know, we have to forgive, but we can never forget. And so as a figure that was recognized, Shoah reached out to him, and they actually interviewed both my dad and my grandma, who was probably in her late 90s at the time, his mother. It's interesting because my dad had one sister, and my aunt never spoke about the exodus from Germany. She just wanted nothing to do with Germany or any memory of it. And my dad was a, you know, person that was out there, you know, trying to, you know, forgive and move on.
Okay, so we have more questions, which is terrific. One is from Elizabeth Ames, whose family got visas. Her mother got a visa, and she's coming on our tour. Elizabeth, hi, Elizabeth. This is for Lucia. Perhaps episodes 3 through 5 will walk back from the end of episode 2, but I was a bit surprised by the interviewee, meaning I think Mordechai Paldiel, suggesting that, suggesting that defiance of state authority was a bad idea Any thoughts? In other words, what was Mordecai trying to say when he says that at the end of episode 2, that you can't be going around celebrating people who are defying orders? It would set a bad example. Society would fall apart, he says. Lucia, tell us what you think about Mordecai's comments.
Well, it's a bit like I said, even today, look, even today, we are told to obey, we had this conversation with I had this conversation with Michael's son. He's a lawyer, right? So we are told to obey our fathers, to obey our teachers, to obey the police. Me as a reporter, I have to obey my editor. So we all have rules. What Sousa Mendes did, he was like Navalny at the time, he was like an enemy of the state. You had Salazar, you had the regime, and the regime had a natural order, a natural way of doing things. So they were like sheep. You had to obey them. No one could speak and tell and do something different. And what Sousa Mendes did is going in another complete direction, and that would put in those days, in 1942, put everything in question. So they couldn't allow that something like that would happen. So, like I said, he had to pay a heavy price. He had to be an example, not just him, the whole family, all the children.
Yeah.
The only place where he could be in peace, it was in Cabanas, because it was a small village, and in Cabanas the people didn't care about politics, and he could be in peace. That was the only solution for him. But as you know, he died very, very lonely, very poor, and without friends. Even his dearest friends abandoned him. He died completely alone.
Yes, that's true. Michael, this is just pure conjecture, but since you've been involved in the Sousa Mendes cause longer than anybody here, since the 1980s, the question is, what was Sousa Mendes's motivation? Why did he do what he did? And I'm wondering if you've had a chance to reflect on that and if you have thoughts about that.
From what I understood, he had that crisis of conscience, and that was Lucia had the clip where he was it was Dr. Paltiel's message when Rabbi Kruger met with him for speaking for hours, and nobody knows what they spoke about. Now, he's talking to a rabbi, and he's a devout Catholic, but they have the same concept of God doing and protecting us, and we are under. That's how we have to respond, and the concepts of God doing or factoring in. Why is this going on? It's Holocaust and people like Hitler murdering Jews, and so he, I can imagine, like his son said, he had a breakdown, and that's, I think, changed his view, and he says, no, I have to do this because God was telling him to do that. I mean, I'm not a theologian, so I can't say, but that would be a theory. It's only theories, I think. Yep.
Let me now turn to the final thoughts section of our program. And Ron, let's start with you. What thoughts would you like to leave with our audience today?
So I'm going to leave the thought right directly from my father, being that it's Father's Day. The last interview or the last question from the Shoah Foundation is, what would you like your grandchildren? And so rather than me trying to do it justice, I'm going to let my dad. So Michael, if you'd be so kind as to play that clip, I'd greatly appreciate it.
For your grandchildren, your children who are going to watch this tape, what would you like to tell them at the end?
Always keep an outlook on life that is full of fun, because that's the only way you'll survive.
Ron, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that says it all for me.
Michael, it's your turn. What would you like to say to our audience in closing?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I want to say that I was very proud how at the end, or rather the end of my interview with it should be at the beginning of the series, but right at the end of my chat with the grandchildren, then my grandson Ben interrupts and asks, well, what would you do, or that to that effect? And I think I forgot to mention that. He made me so proud, because that's the reason we're making this film, or the film was made, because people have to ask themselves, what would you do if you were in a situation that you have to help somebody at the risk of your own life or status or anything else? And that's always the moral question, that what would you do if you're really up against the wall?
Good. Lucia, the last word goes to you.
Well, in a time of social media, I think that journalism and reporters have a very harsh and tough battle. So since I was a child, I wanted to be a reporter. And now I always think about the legacy I want to leave behind to the next generations. And if I had to choose one work, I would definitely choose this one. My colleagues that have already seen, and the critics say that's my best work. It's very, I don't know if it's a good thing, because I'm starting another one, and so there's a lot of pressure, but I think that there are also values that, like the Navalny documentary shows us, there are also values that we journalists have to fight for, because today the world still has some tough questions and ideals that are in danger. Not just, there are a lot of Sousa Mendes that need to be protected.
Yes, that's for sure. So I wanted to reiterate my thanks first to Eva Woomer for her generous sponsorship of this whole series. My thanks to Lucia Gonçalves and her team at SIC Television in Portugal. My thanks, of course, to Ron Brunel and Michael Spett and Michael McCabe, who's here behind the scenes on all of these programs, along with my other colleague, Matthew Spurn. And thanks to all of you for spending a little bit of your Father's Day with us. And hey, Dad, happy Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to you all. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.